This conference will now be recorded.
Got mail. Hey there. How are you guys today?
Check, I get all the hard questions.
Yeah.
Say that or I'm on top of the dirt. One or the other.
Better than the alternative.
Yep. At this point, this.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's better than the alternative or not.
Well,
That's
that's
why
true.
you
That's
have
what my
to kinda-
son's like. You're not thinking all the way.
Yeah, you kind of have to move that way.
I guess it depends.
Yeah, for some.
May not be so good. You eat a lot.
My days all come back.
Yeah. Let's see. This one's nice.
Right, yeah.
Yours isn't cold.
Would prefer that.
Oh,
I mean,
Not cold?
My brother asked it.
That's why I
He
wouldn't
would
want-
say it by school sometimes. drop me off.
your vocal cords ready? in
Because they
case
could,
you
if you were
break out
certified,
strong.
Cream or something.
you had to have a sticker.
You had good response to your.
Yeah, it was slow going at first, and I feel like it's gonna be small, but we're getting some, like, I figured the last couple days, because people don't want to commit too early. just in case something comes up.
Well, see, I'm preoccupied for the next month or so.
Yeah, I was hoping it would work out for.
Yep.
for
She was
Heidi.
excited about it. She's tied up pretty good during the.
Yeah. It's a busy season. I feel like.
Oh, I think we're ready.
Busy season.
November 8th, council meeting called to order. Would you please stand for the pledge of allegiance and moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First item on the agenda would be consider approval of the consent agenda items, approval of the minutes from the October the 25th meeting, and statement of the bills paid in the amount of $1,458,868.45, and recommendation of approval for planning commission regarding the preliminary final plat for 1650 South 102nd Street. 2021-07 PPT/FPT and acceptance of dedicated public rights of way and easements.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
It has been moved and second to approve this consent agenda. Would the clerk please call roll?
Shriver,
Yes.
Stites,
Yes.
Adams,
Yes.
Cahar,
Yes.
Malott.
Yes.
And before we go into the requests or comments from the public, Chief Maziz has an introduction for us.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I have just I have an introduction and a quick announcement as well. And it's more of a celebration than introductions, but it kind of goes hand in hand here of just all of the hard work and hard decisions that this governing body had to make over the last year, specifically balancing budget, adding staff to the police department, the pay matrix increase and those benefits, keeping that all in place. And why it's a celebration is the first piece of this is a little bittersweet. We did have a resignation of one of our officers who's been, after several attempts, had landed his dream job to go to Overland Park Police Department, something he's been working for a couple of years now. And that's bittersweet, but it's also celebration in some way because upon the receipt of that resignation, we hired somebody immediately, something we couldn't do just in this last 12 months without these decisions that you made. But we hired somebody more seasoned, educated, and ready to go to work in the next month or so. So we're really excited about that. And I really do attribute that sincerely to some of the decisions we've made. And I know they were pretty tough. But also in celebration of that, I'm very proud to introduce to you two individuals here that are a part that I think were specifically kind of drawn to us because of some of the things that we had been doing over this past year, specifically again because of that, those funding opportunities and the growth of the organization and that sort of thing. So first and foremost, matter of distinction, the one with the beard. So we have Anthony Tony Schubert. He is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, which we appreciate and respect. He's a seasoned police officer who came to us from Mission, where he was a detective. So he's hit the ground running very early October, and he hasn't stopped since. And then immediately thereafter, he was joined by Christine Regland. Distinction, doesn't have a beard. Degree from the Citadel. Police officer from South Carolina. Moved to Lenexa, Kansas, where she served as a police officer in Lenexa. Promoted to Master Patrol Officer, Field Training Officer duties, and one of her assignments was investigations. And then came just a couple of weeks after Officer Schubert. Quality people. We've had quality people come through our organization, but those are the people we lose. These are the people we gain, right? This is what we intended to do, and I think there's opportunity for this to be a celebration, and we hope them to stick around as long as they can, as long as they want to. And I think we've done all the things. If you recall, not that long ago, the officers kind of had a sheet of these kind of things that we needed to look at. And that one final piece is just looking at our facilities. We know that takes time. We know that's a big, tough decision, even tougher than the ones we've already had. But we're just moving forward, and we're really proud to have these folks on board, along with the other ones, and those new ones coming on board in just the next few weeks. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. They're on the clock. So
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Maziz. Welcome. The next item on the agenda will be requests or comments from the public. If there are none, we will move on then to the next item.
Mayor?
Zach, you don't have anything to read? Okay, very good.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion, we move into an executive session pursuant to KSA 754319B2 for consultation with a legal counsel for matters which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship related to the Special Benefits District in the city of Edwardsville, returning at 7.
Oh, 6:20.
6:20 p.m.
If I might just note, we're actually going to be talking about the TIF district, not a special benefit district.
Okay.
Still falls under that.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made and second to recess into executive session pursuant to KSA 75-4319B2 for consultation with legal counsel on matters which would be deemed privileged in attorney-client relationship related to the TIF district in the city of Edwardsville, and return at 6:20. Would the clerk please call roll?
Shriver?
Yes.
Stites?
Yes.
Adams?
Yes.
Cahar?
Yes.
Malott?
Yes.
This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
No, I did one.
I don't miss.
They told me to quit playing with the buttons.
Oh, come on.
Move to return
The cords right
to regular session.
Second.
There motion and second to return to regular session. Would the clerk please call roll?
Shriver?
Yes.
Stites?
Yes.
Adams?
Yes.
Cahar?
Yes.
Malott?
Yes.
Next item on the agenda, we'll consider resolution 2021-20, setting a public hearing for the creation of a redeveloped district tax increment financing district.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and second to approve resolution 2021-20. Would the clerk please call roll?
Shriver?
Yes.
Stites?
Yes.
Adams?
Yes.
Cahar?
Yes.
Malott?
Yes.
Next item is to hear an update on design considerations of our 98th Street project.
As I think Randy will be coming up to make a presentation. This is really a follow-up from a meeting about a month and a half ago. on just some of the current cost estimates. And they've been reviewing those things. I think, in lieu of trying to hold a workshop, I think there was really only two big areas to look at. And Randy's going to kind of cover those, and hopefully you'll be up to date on these things. And I would just note that budgets on these kind of projects, there's often not set a whole project budget at the front end. I mean, it's a little, and I won't say it's not a not to exceed. Obviously, we try to put best forth efforts to determine what that might be, but they do fluctuate as you're going through the design process. As things get added, taken away, you get more information. So I think that's where we're at. So with that, I will turn it over to Randy, and he'll cover the presentation. And if there's questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Randy Gordon, BHC. This slide, if you'll remember back, I think it was September 27th, should look familiar because it's exactly the same. That's just to provide a little bit of a refresher for you of where we're looking at project-wise starting in and the kind of road section that's intended to be constructed. Next slide, if you don't mind. Oh, do I get? All right. I hope you guys are in for a long. Okay. So originally at the September 27th update, we came with an initial estimate in terms of what we expect the overall project cost will be. The good news is, since that time, we've refined the design a little bit and looked some ways to cut down on some of the earthwork quantities. And so we expect that should have somewhere around $300,000 of savings. So that brings the overall current kind of estimate of the total project cost down to about $8.5 million. Again, as just a refresher for you, $4.8 million in federal funds have been allocated through Mid-America Regional Council for this project, which will be an 80-20 match between the city and between KDOT and the city. So that leaves about 3.7. When we were here before, we had about $4 million. So again, working with the intended 40-mile-an-hour design speed, we're still able to achieve that and cut the cost down to this 8.5 overall. So the other thing we talked about at the time was 40 mile an hour, which is the desired design speed for the road, for the curves, to provide some additional cushion for posting at 35. So since the other changes that we've incorporated, we took that and then looked at, okay, 40 mile an hour design speed. And then if we allow ourselves to make the vertical curves a little bit sharper, to do it right at a 35 mile an hour design speed, we looked at the earthwork quantities, which is really the only difference, right? It's how much material we have to move. The difference in cost right now is apparent. It's about $20,000. So we'll leave that there for a second. So not very much, and 20,000 plus or minus, we still have that much, far more uncertainty than that. Other ways that potentially reducing costs, if you ultimately decide that's the course of action you want to follow. We talked about the north end, north of Riverview, taking that out of the project, and so shortening it. So it would be from Kansas Avenue through Riverview intersection. That would save about $850,000 if you want to proceed. So right now, what we think is a good course of action for the city is continue designing with 40 mile an hour design speed, because to me, $20,000 additional investment is certainly worth a roadway that's a little more forgiving for motorists who are going fast. And then the other thing is we can continue to design the entire project all the way up to the city limits as we've been doing, but then we will be giving you updated cost estimates as we get closer and closer to letting by KDOT. And we can give you an updated estimate shortly before we give final plans to KDOT. And if at that point you go, hey, we really want to try and reduce costs, then at that point we can basically pull those sheets out of the plans to oversimplify things horribly. But still, at that point, it would be fairly simple to do. It would not be particularly costly for us to do that at that point. So at that point, if that cost savings held, then your overall project total somewhere around 7.7 million, which is within a few $100,000 of what we originally assumed it was probably going to be when we got applying for funds almost 2 years ago now.
One thing I would just add to that from a financial, and it's kind of in the memo. So when we originally went out for this proposal with STP, while this was our project, we initially didn't get full funding. We got funded at about 3.8 million. So we were going to have to reduce the scope of the project because of CARES Act and some of the federal funding. We actually went back and were awarded the full amount at the 4.8 million. So when we first went in, we assumed we would have a local match of about $3.2 million in this project. So, at the 7.7 million, we're probably still pretty close to that match point of the $3.2 million. I just pulled up some information. When we have about 740,000 in our project fund right now that we're using for right-of-way acquisition for all the engineering costs. So you kind of take that away from that number. And I went back and looked at our 2020 bond issuance that we did, which was right about 2.5 million. It was 2,450,000. And just give you some reference, that bond issue at $2.5 million cost us about 155,000 a year. So just from a bond cost, that's about where it's at, which is still well within our standards for the amount of debt to overall revenues, whether it's the property taxes and the debt service fund or our overall overlapping all the measures, we would still be within those standards that you would want to stay with, not having too much debt on the books, et cetera. So we're still kind of in the same field as it goes, as it relates to the financial piece of it. I'm not the engineer guy, but my financial piece, we're still in that realm. And so I think, as Randy said, at some point we'll have to make a final decision on that last part, if it financially makes sense or not. It's not unlike when we did our trail. When we did the first part of the Phyllis Freeman Trail, we actually designed the full trail, but we could only fund about 2/3 of it. And then we took those plans later on because we had other funding sources, and we used those same plans to build the rest of the trail. So it's somewhat in that same, obviously that was a lot smaller project than this, but it's not as if we just take those plans and throw them away. We still have those for, if other funding comes available, we want to move forward with it. That's something. We definitely want to make sure we maximize our federal funding, the 4.8. And remember, that's only construction cost. So all the right of way, the acquisitions, the engineering, all of those types of things are 100% on the city. The only things that are eligible is the actual construction cost and the inspection services, which is referred to as construction engineering, or CE. Those are the only two items that are eligible for the 80/20 match. So just we always want to try to maximize the federal dollars. We don't want to leave federal dollars on the table that have been awarded to us. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's my 2 cents.
And again, just to give you a sense of the time scale here, I think our recommendation is you don't have to decide right now. We're obviously very interested to see what inflation continues to do, or maybe not do, pricing. This is currently scheduled to bid no sooner than October of 2023, right? So we're almost 2 years out. That's when the federal funds were allocated for this. So we do have a little bit of time to come back and update things as we go along. 2 years from now, maybe some of the stresses on the economy are starting to be relieved a little bit, catch up.
If I might just add, so that's the federal schedule, if you recall right. we're ahead of that federal schedule by about a year. I mean, so part of the purpose is to get it as far along as we can on these plans and actually be ready to bid them if the funding cycle changes, right? So our project moves up, another project moves back. And quite honestly, with the adoption of the federal transportation bills and some of the uncertainties that have been in just transportation in general, the other types of CARES type dollars, it's possible that they may be looking for projects that are, as the old term was, shovel ready. I'm sure there'll be a new term now, but projects that are ready to go. And so one of the things we've been doing is we want to be ready to go with the project. If we can't go out to bid until a little bit later, that's fine. But we really want to try to have the project ready to go by end of 2022. That's kind of our internal goal. But the federal funding would not be available until October of 2023 at the earliest, unless, there's some things that can be done, but it takes some work. But right now, that's the schedule.
Has there been any other conversation with unified government regarding the trails, the walking path going north past our city and the potential of 98th Street joining up with this project?
I've had limited discussions. I don't know if Randy's had some
Yes.
more detailed than I've had. So
Yeah, we had a conversation with one of the UG senior staff members about this to ask the question of where is that in the priorities for the UG, and it's not. They, I think, are going to be relying heavily on commercial development, the private sector investment that would trigger improvements to 98th Street that would then, as part of those improvements, the UG would have that developer make the trail improvements. Certainly for 98th Street was the direction she's received policy-wise. So they have it nowhere in sight that they're going to invest UG funds for pedestrian or trail enhancements along 98th Street.
That's interesting because I recall a couple years ago when I had reached out and there was, and I think I'd relate it to Mike, that there was some interest, whenever, just at least some interest in it. And now to hear that they have no interest is disappointing, but
Yeah, and I think my question was geared towards specifically programming dollars, which isn't the same as certainly recognizing the value of it. But I think staff has not been told that at any time in the future should they be prepared to bring it into their program. So
I would.
it won't happen. You know how that goes, right? It just needs a champion.
Yep, I agree.
I would concur. That's generally the feedback we, from my level is, it's kind of on the radar out there. Someday they got to realign 98th Street to connect with what they've already realigned and make sense that there's a connection from
Maybe they have
point A to
align it.
point
I
B.
mean,
But
That is,
but there hasn't been, those discussions are there, but to say they're looking to put this into their project programming the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I
the
think a
answer is
development change, anything up there, somebody comes along and
Sure.
says we're gonna build something in the corner of 98th State Avenue, I think things change.
I would
Words
agree.
from sparkling that.
Yeah.
Where it kind of seems like, in my opinion, as far as us getting to our city limit boundary, it feels like we're painting three sides of our house.
Yeah.
I mean, let's get it to the point where if there's something from the UG side, they can come up and say, all we have to do is meet up with what's already existing there. We're good to go. So that's my.
right now anyway, even if you decide you need to save some money, we'll get it within 1,100 feet, which is, that's a little more affordable than what the UG would be building to now, which is a couple miles of no 98th Street pedestrian facilities. So, it still can be a prod for the UG if you want to try and get them to invest some money there. It's a pretty big gesture, right, on your part in terms of a commitment for pedestrian facilities on linking KCK and Edwardsville.
And I sure think that that connectability is important that we've all been, seeking from Kansas City down, all the way down to our industrial, well, at least to Kansas Avenue and then eventually down to our industrial park. But,
All the way to the river eventually,
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
This is our last slide. Any other questions? Just, that's kind of our recommendation. It seems like a good course of action.
Thank you, Randy. Next item on the agenda is consider ordinance number 1047, revising chapter 6, health and sanitation in the Edwardsville Code of Ordinances.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'll just give a update on this. As you recall, at our last meeting, we provided you a copy of the current ordinance, the chapter 6 of health and sanitation. That current ordinance has 7 sections to it. Mostly it relates to items around code enforcement, nuisances, things of that. There was one section, the very first section, about appointment of a health officer. We don't have a health officer. That's really the county function. Not to say we couldn't, but the way the statute is, really the county is the county health officer. There was some items in there about criminal type offenses in relation to using glues or paraphernalia, those types of things. There was a section in there about rat proofing your structures. Again, I'm not sure it made a lot of intention. And then the last section we really didn't speak about last time, but would also be excluded is the very last section as it relates to ambulance service. That section was put in some time back, I'm going to assume when the city contracted directly with the old medical ambulance service out of KCMO in those days, which was after the city had a volunteer ambulance service, prior to contracting with the unified government, and obviously prior to us having our own service. It's really not a necessary section. I mean, at some point, the city wants to contract any service, it has that authority already under home rule. So it really had no value in the overall. So what you see tonight, I provided you with a red line from the last time. Mainly it's typo type errors. I don't think there's anything of substantial changes in that ordinance that was provided to you before, and then you have a clean version of that same ordinance. Again, it really will help certainly in our code enforcement area, where there's one process for all our codes that are around that. So whether, again, it's an abandoned vehicle on somebody's property, or it's trash and rubbish, or it's high grass and weeds, or any of those things, the process will be the same. Obviously, somebody could be cited or noticed for one or more of the items in a single contact, but we don't have to go through different processes. And of course, it's added those languages that are allowed in statutes that doesn't require us to go back and use certified mail each and every time somebody commits the same offense over and over and over. So, right, once they're noticed for their high grass and weeds on a piece of property by the formal process, then following that, we don't have to give them that same notice, but they're still held, I guess, liable to following the rules as long, excuse me, as long as we follow the process that's stated here. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we would recommend approval of the ordinance as presented.
I did have someone ask me recently if we use the 10-day notices or stickers on vehicles that are just maybe unoperable and in the public right of ways or streets. Does this allow for that?
Well, if it's on the street, it's a law enforcement issue, and I believe they can use that form of notice. If it's on private property, we first have to use the certified mail notice, but subsequent to that, by the adoption of this ordinance, those types of violations in the future for the next 24 months, so if they occurred in the same place, same people, then there's alternative notices, including the use of door hangers, stick-on notices, those types of things. It doesn't require us to go through a formal notification process. By formal, I mean we have to do a certified mail return receipt and wait to ensure that they've either got it or refused to get it. It allows us to notice up and that is a change, I think, plus.
So you're saying that on a 10-day notice on a vehicle that is parked either on an unimproved surface, inoperable, or not registered, it has to get a registered letter sent to them before a 10-day notice can be put on it?
On private property, yes.
I mean, why, is that per Edwardsville ordinance? Because that's not state. And I know that, I mean, myself personally have put on many of them,
Well,
walked right up and put a 10-day notice on them on
well,
private
under
property.
Statutes for nuisances, it requires a notice. Now, whether it has to be how many days, some things are 10 and some aren't listed at all, but if it's a nuisance, you do have to give notice by certified mail. That's the statutory reference.
That's a state statute.
Yes. Unless we're misreading it, but we did have city attorney review it as well. I don't have the statute reference. in front of me.
Then, I mean, I'm just,
And if that's what it is, that's what it is. But has something changed recently that makes that where other cities in our area are still doing that exact same thing, walking up and putting a 10-day notice on them?
The few cities I spoke to said that they went through the same process.
I'm not sure who they are, but I'm going to say Kansas City, Kansas, because that's what I'm most familiar with.
Follow up in 24 months for that first notice of violation where I need to tell somebody. So I don't know where in the process they are, and they may not be following what they need to follow. I can't speak to another city's process, but this is very common, and most cities do it this way.
But on a public right of way, you can just do the sticker.
Well, I defer that to
Yes.
the police chief, but I believe that's
Okay.
it's an inoperable vehicle on the
Okay, and maybe we can just follow up and confirm
road. We
if
we
that's
can
the-
verify.
of the
I mean,
state statute or
it's-
whatever. It's just like, it come up a couple of times, but
I mean, I mean, not to say we don't have any, but that's probably, I mean, we have a few of those where they're untagged or inoperable. I don't, clearly the biggest one is our grass and weed violations. That's by far the largest number of them. And I think the hardest thing where we got, quite honestly, the most complaints is, well, how many times you have to tell them to go mow their grass every year? But our ordinance wasn't in compliance with the state that says, once you give them notice of one time,
Yeah.
then you don't have to go through all that process. I mean, you can go immediately to abatement. I mean,
right.
you
And
don't
it
have to
might,
give
it
them
might
a
be
second or third
confusion
chance.
between the codes officers and the law enforcement aspect of it as well in the statute. So maybe we can just look into that and clarify it a little bit. But
There's a general nuisance policy, and weeds and grass always get special things thrown in there. And so the whole logic of the one for weeds and grass is, you get one notice that your grass can't be of this height. Grass grows, so it's guaranteed that it could get up to that height again. And you are responsible, you are now aware of what the code is. And we shouldn't have to go through that process every time to be able to make compliance. It's kind of the same with the general nuisance. we give you a notice of violation to tell you what it's based on, where it is on the code, what the violation is, what you need to do. And then we know that you know what is expected of you. And we shouldn't have to go through that process again to make you comply either on that same vehicle or the same type of violation on another vehicle or whatever that nuisance may be. So that's the logic behind those two things.
But they will be different notices if it's a vehicle versus grass.
Well, it'll be a notice of violation.
So, well,
Yeah.
I may have said that wrong. So if somebody's getting a codes notice for tall grass, so we send a certified letter for that. And then say 6 months down the road, they have a vehicle that needs addressed. So we'll send a certified letter for this since it's a separate sort of issue.
You can only use that, not having to notify them again in 12 months for weed grass. You cannot use that for any other type of violation.
Okay.
Again, because weeds and grass grow.
Yeah.
So we know it's gonna happen potentially.
Thank you.
It's always changing and always.
I think the statutory reference, I was trying to look at that, is in 12-1617. And then there's several sections in there. Yeah, I know that's the abatement of nuisances, notice assessments, et cetera. So that's where this comes from. And that's the basis of it. So, and it specifically references about nuisances. I'm trying to read this real quick. Everything, from any nuisance that is determined to be a nuisance, which we're saying that an abandoned vehicle is a nuisance. So if it's on private property and it's not licensed, it's inoperable, and
Not registered.
not registered, right, then it is considered a nuisance. By the ordinance, we're stating that is a nuisance. And then if it's a nuisance, this is the process by which you will be notified and given the opportunity to correct it, right? Remove it, repair it, go get a license, register, whatever that's, and if not, then you're subject to citations or removal. And we have had vehicles in the past, I can't speak to the case, where somebody has left a nuisance vehicle on the property. And then the police department would have it removed. It goes to the tow lot. It effectively becomes the property of the tow lot unless the person comes and pays whatever associated fees are to remove it. And if they don't, then the tow lots have, I'm not the law person, have a right to ultimately sell that vehicle at an auction at some future time, whatever the statute allows. That is the process have used. What we haven't again had was the ability to say something keeps occurring and you're not, you just keep doing it over and over and over again. I think is where it comes into play, where we haven't had the power or the authority to say that's not acceptable for you to keep doing it. And sure, we can send them to court. The challenge with court is we send you to court, you walk in and you say, I plead guilty to the charge, and the judge says, here's your fine, and I order you to go fix or do whatever, and they don't do it, then yeah, we can come in and clean it up and assess the cost, or they end up back in court again. I mean, you have a few people, they'd rather go to court and get fined and not take care of the problem. It's probably $50 to fix it versus $250 or $500 for a fine.
I think the question,
That is nuisance vehicle versus section 6, which is an abandoned motor vehicle, KSA 8-126 to 149, which says any motor vehicle which is not currently registered or tagged pursuant to such Kansas state statute, inclusive and amended or parked in violation of code or incapable of moving under its own power or junked or wrecked condition. That's separate from a nuisance vehicle.
And I assume that's already enforceable without ordinance if it's statutory.
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, if it's in the statutes and gives the police department the authority do that, then they would have that authority, but I don't know that that's the fact, but I know the section references it. And I believe we referenced that in that abandoned motor vehicle is how we say, since any motor vehicle which is not currently registered or tagged pursuant to section 8-126 to 8-149, inclusive as amended. So if it's not registered or tagged pursuant to that, it's a nuisance. Or if it's in violation of our parking code, or it's incapable of moving under its own power, or an adjunctive recognition. It doesn't have to meet all four of those conditions.
No.
It has to meet one of those conditions to be a violation. And I think, what drove this was somewhat from the council, right? That we've had these code issues ongoing. It somewhat was internally driven in the sense of we have to keep going back to it and going, okay, wait a second, what process are we using for this one? What process are we doing for that one? Which ones go to a council, which one go to court, which one go to someplace, and it said to all of those, if we can simplify the process down into one process for these violations, then we don't have to have a separate process for each and every different type. Now, if you look at code books of some other cities, they will have a nuisance code, and then they will have abandoned vehicles as a section. They'll have high grass and weeds as a section. They may have other pieces as a section. Again, I think we've taken, if it's a nuisance, it's a nuisance. And if it's a nuisance, the direction has been, we want to address nuisances. Obviously, number one, we want compliance. I mean, we would prefer to walk up and say, there's this problem, we need you to correct it. There may have been a reason, maybe they need some help, maybe they need maybe they need social services, maybe they need other resources. Maybe it's like, I've been trying to get rid of the car, but how do I do that? How can I get a record? A lot of times people want to correct things. And then you have some that'll say, oh, don't worry, I'm going to take care of that. And you come back a week later, hey, I'm working on it. And you could go back for the next 6 months and you'll get the same answer. I think those are the ones that become problematic nuisances where the community says, hey, we're all happy for somebody that's down on their luck and we'll help them come mow their yard, but we're not going to mow their yard the rest of their lives. And we get some of that, right? People they get so fed up, they're just, well, I'll just keep mowing that person's yard. And we may not even know it, right? It's mowed, so as far as we know, until they eventually get mad and say, I'm not going to mow their yard anymore. And then it becomes, a nuisance violation. And we hear it's been that way for 10 years. Well, not necessarily at this level. So again, I just say it's our recommendation to adopt ordinance 1047. And then if there's other questions, we're happy to hear it. We have changed the name from health and sanitation to health and environmental nuisances. Just it doesn't. I don't know how ambulance service ever related to sanitation or health. I'm not. I think that was kind of a stretch, but anyways, that's again our recommendation.
I have a kind of a specific question that and Chief might have some insight to it and how this might fit in this ordinance or if we need to adjust anything. And that was so not a nuisance vehicle, but an abandoned vehicle at a church in Edwardsville. So it was left there for and this is a while ago, but a couple of weeks, and the church said, well, this doesn't belong to anyone in our congregation. It was just left here. Is that addressable within our ordinance?
Certainly, they could address it, it's their property, so they could have a private tow come and tow it. So what happens in those situations, they would call, you see those signs, private tow it, owner's expense. Well, if there's no owner, we can't find them or whatever, they can have that towed and mechanics lien, the tow company will put a mechanics lien on that vehicle and then dispose of it, sell it, however they do to collect maybe some of their fees if they can't afford that much. That's something a private owner, somebody parks a vehicle on your property and you say, what the heck, it's blocking my drive, or they've abandoned it altogether, that sort of thing. You could call the company, the tow company, and then they could tow it at the owner's expense. Since you're not the owner, it wouldn't be your expense. then they would then annex lien and then process the car in that legal sense. So, but they can also call us and we can facilitate, we can help. You know, in some of those cases, maybe they don't know that or whatever. We can surely coach them on that sort of thing. We have a tow procedure. We have a tow ordinance, and our tow companies are bound by a contract with the city. So those that you see, Allen-Don and Tiger Tow are the ones that we are, that have licenses. And those are the ones that if you call the police, that's who's going to come to those types of situations. But typically, the owner of that property has authority to remove that. It's not theirs. So they have that authority. So I don't think we need a separate something to deal with that. I think the distinction of the first question, which was, we have a traffic ordinance. So when you have a vehicle on public right of way, public property, the authority comes from the police under that law and says, hey, it's not lawfully parked, it's not lawfully registered, not a lawful driver, whatever happened to it, it's there, and we have the authority to tow it under what I just described, those ordinances which give us that authority. So we would do law enforcement that way, but our public officer then is not that person, right? So then the public officer then is what you're seeing before you now is taking sections of an ordinance that are all over the place, and it's very confusing. Now, I'll admit, we use stickers, and you will see a sticker, because that will identify the car that we mark as this appears to be abandoned and or whatever, maybe green, maybe red. But this ordinance will then, we will send them a certified letter at their last known address. And then if there's no response or a response, that kind of kicks off a formal piece of it. So by definition, we know what a discarded, abandoned vehicle is. So then we have the next section which says it's prohibited by definition. And then this is what we have to do. You have to notify that owner, because really what you're dealing with is private property. It's not the public piece of it, right? So we say that this in its condition now is a nuisance under our code. And this streamlines that yes, we're going to have to bail them something a little different than we're doing, whether that's right or wrong. Our ordinance is really convoluted in that. But you'll see a sticker, because that helps us on our side identify, well, that's the one. 2 months later, it might be a different one, but this is the one we're going to give you notice. If you don't do something within that, then we have other authorities in which we can take action. And that's done by the public officer, the code person, right? And so that's really the distinct difference. If we're doing public property, and then we're doing this private property, which again, those are sensitive rights, and we have to give them plenty of notice. And quite frankly, the compliance is really what we want. So we want to say, even if it takes mailing them something, which I wish we didn't have to do that on some of the simple things, but that gives a formal notice of, hey, the city has recognized this nuisance by ordinance, well defined, and then you have to clean it up, and this is your formal notice of the time frame, and then we'll come back and check. So that really takes all of this that's way out there in the ordinance now and brings this in. I thought, well aligned. It's a little easier. It's not so just confusing. As we had a conversation about weeds, that's different than cars and debris and tree piles and all these. So but imagine that in 10 different places in our ordinance. Now it's really difficult to follow what notice, what process, how do we have to do that? And this will say, no matter what stickers we're using, if it's private property, we're going to attach a sticker. We're going to send you a notice that we attach that sticker, and here's your 10-day formal notice, and then we'll take that action on it. So I hope that kind of clarifies.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion that we adopt ordinance 1047, an ordinance repealing and replacing the code of the city of Edwardsville, Kansas, chapter 6, and repealing all other ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with the provisions of this ordinance.
Second.
It has been moved and second to adopt ordinance number 1047, and I will not repeat all the following for preceding comment. Would the clerk please call roll?
Shriver,
Yes.
Stites.
Yes.
Adams,
Yes.
Cahar,
Yes.
Malott.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is to consider recommendation of approval from the Cemetery, Parks, and Public Services Public Spaces CPPS Board regarding the use of special sales tax funds for vegetation management at City Park along the Phyllis J. Freeman Memorial Trail.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This item originally was before you at your October 25th meeting. Originally, the concept was to address 8 acres of vegetation along the creek and around the city trail at the city park. At the October 25th meeting, there was a request to perhaps reconceptualize the project, scale it down a little bit, and maybe consider some equipment that could accomplish some of the similar goals. In discussing this with the Public Works Director and the City Manager, the equipment alternative was not something that we thought was honestly worth pursuing, and the reasons for that were even with a piece of equipment that does exist that would address some of this vegetation, it would do more to just eliminate vegetation rather than what we want to do is just clean up areas versus saw down entire areas. And there would also be the issue continued of actually getting to those areas, considering the terrain around the creeks and just the access issues that are there. To say nothing of the fact of storing additional parks and public works equipment, we are at a place right now where finding a space for that kind of equipment would be difficult. So what we did was pursue potentially scaling down some of this project and represent it. I don't think this is I wouldn't couch it as a top of the line priority or super critical project. I do think that based on the work that the goats have done in other areas, it would provide some significant aesthetic improvements to these sections of the park. We scaled down the areas from the original 8 acres to what's in your page 44 of the agenda, which captures about 3 acres. Areas that are abutting the northwest side of the park, which is near where the soccer is played, and then the east side of the park proper. So this is in the actual city park at 1200 Blake Street, essentially eliminating the 5 acres that would be immediately north of Wood End along that creek. So we focused on the areas of within the city park proper. So essentially reducing about 60% of the original project. In doing so, and in talking with the contractor, we were still able to secure the pricing for the 2 grazings at $1,500 for the initial graze and then $1,000 for the follow-up graze. And then using that equation, the quoted cost for the work is $7,500. The originally approved amount from the CPPS board was for $20,000 based on the strong performance of our sales tax, as this would be paid for out of the special sales tax fund. I still think that we've got a balance in that fund and overages in the revenue in that fund that would support $20,000. But I understand it being an unbudgeted item to kind of consider all of our alternatives. So in reworking the project, we were able to scale it down about 60% to a price point which is per the financial policy, not technically one which we would go back to the city council for approval. Costs under projects under 10,000 don't typically go to city council for approval. Because we talked about this at a previous meeting, we're bringing this up for further direction to see if this is something that you want us to pursue or not pursue. So if you've got questions on this, I
have a few. Why? So I walked it today. I walked both sections of this map today, and one is alongside the soccer field, so it's not alongside the path at all, which I know we need trimmed back quite a bit. But then on the walking trail, and I have heard from several folks that they would like to see our walking trails maintained a little bit better, the weeds and the growth along those cut back. But there's about 3 to 6 feet alongside the walking trail that I could drive my 0-turn mower and knock out in just a couple of hours. And so I feel like it would be more beneficial to work on just keeping that, use weed eaters. It looks like we're not using weed eaters right now. Use weed eaters and the equipment that we have to maintain that 3 to 6 feet of space between the walking trail and where the drop off is. Whereas that incline between the creek and the flat area, that's just gonna cut, by the spring, we're gonna have that growth back again. And then by, it's gonna be every few months. I don't think that we can justify spending even $7,500 multiple times a year for just that side of the creek where nobody really is probably gonna be anyway.
You're right that people don't typically go to that area of the creek. This would just be cleaning up the sites and make it not so overgrown and bushy looking when you're, along that section of the park. This was kind of in taking the council's direction around budget time about looking to see what different areas we can look at for kind of contracted solutions. This seemed to be something that would, like I mentioned, provide an aesthetic improvement to the park under that contracted solution, which would address that 3 to 6 foot that you're talking about, in addition to these other areas that, are visible, if not, necessarily recommended for access. But I understand your point too. There could be more work to be done in that 3 to 6 feet on the, west side of the trail. And it's, it's a matter of getting that work scheduled in conjunction with everything else that goes on, and then making it a priority.
Sure.
The thought behind this was, well, let's make this a priority, look to the contracted solution to pursue it and presenting it for possible approval. And like I mentioned, this isn't a critical health and sanitation. I think it will do a lot to clean up some of the pests and critters in that area, which do provide, some, it makes some of the maintaining of the park area a little bit more difficult. But if this isn't the direction that the council wants to pursue, then we can continue on the track that we are, which does involve controlled burns at the city park. Follow up in those areas is difficult because of just the level of work that's required for maintaining the city park and the relatively lean staff we've got to do it, which again is why we look to the contracted solution. We'll continue to perform the controlled burns and try and follow up with them as best as we can, whether we go down this road or not. So if really, I'm just looking for consensus on whether if this is something we want to pursue or not.
And I think looking into maybe better weed eating equipment with the metal head instead of the string heads, maybe a DR that can clear that brush a little bit easier. But if we just mow it on a regular basis along that trail, that'll stay down. I think that would make a world of difference. As far as being over, sorry, Zach.
Oh, I was good.
Sorry. As far as being over in the budget, I think that's fantastic. Not over budget, but having more money in the budget, I think that's fantastic. But I would really like to see that money spent in something that is a concrete thing that we can, not concrete, but something we can look at down the road, not something that's going to be spent again and again. I know we talked about and was a truck for the fire department. I believe that's something that could potentially come out of this tax funds, or lighting for the trail, or maybe some landscaping, things that we'd be able to see, in 6 months or in a year where that money went to. So, and that's I don't know if anyone has other thoughts on it, but that, from me taking a walk down there, that's what I saw.
Currently, we have comments, but they're asking for consensus, so you can either agree with that by silence or make your own comments. So
Yeah, at this point, if there's other comments or questions on the item, then what I'll probably do is take this as direction to maybe just pursue other means on vegetation control.
I think the only thing that I would add to this is on the tractor that we purchased that has the mowing arm that is designed to mow those types of things back, could it not be, and I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't know, I'm just asking, could it not be utilized to go down through there and do what we're thinking of doing, that 3 to 6 feet, mow it back from the trail, and do that multiple times throughout the year, two, 3 times, and it knocks that back. And then eventually what happens is you get it to where you can run a mower down it, just a riding mower.
And I think some of the work that you're describing could be accomplished with the existing equipment that we have.
Mhm.
And that's a different question as to, do we have the time and personnel to make this area of the park the priority? Because whenever we get, if weather conditions make mowing duty fall behind, these areas aren't the ones that we're focusing on. We're focusing on the park proper and, areas on and off, directly on and off the trail along Wood End and over at Riverfront Park. So it's not that we don't have probably some of the equipment to cut back to that 3 to 6 feet that you're talking about, which would provide that cleanliness aspect that we're really trying to accomplish here. But it's a matter of, this is a contracted solution that would do that, which we feel that the revenues and the special sales tax can support, in addition to when we have to reprioritize. If we've got 3 days of rain, but we have soccer coming up and we're all hands on deck and getting our, our soccer fields done, these are the areas that fall and kind of become on the periphery. That we'll get to those when we get to those, and we just sometimes aren't able to get to them.
It seems though like this section, and I could be wrong, but it looks like it hasn't been mowed all year. Like it's 6 feet out and up and over. So I think
That section along the
along
southeast
the
part of the
trail.
trail.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so I feel like that would be the place to start, is cleaning it, keeping it maintained, and then
Yeah.
going from there. But I think that would make a lot of difference.
The chief just reminded me, the fire department does perform controlled burns in essentially both of these areas at the beginning of, actually I should say the tail end of the winter before the spring hits, with the intention of, when we've had meetings, here's our plan. Fire department's going to go in there and do controlled burns. We're going to come in there and we're going to provide that additional, clean up with the equipment and the folks that we've got. And then it rains for 4 days and it's soccer and it's baseball and it's things like that. So it's, again, it's not a, we recognize that we probably have the capability from an equipment standpoint to get just that 3 to 6 feet that we're talking about, if that's the priority. It's just a matter of, it falling down on the priority list whenever we've got, 2 guys in our parks department and, 2 weeks worth of games that we got to catch up on for mowing. So again, not highly critical. I think it would provide some aesthetic improvements to the park and add to the regular programming, mowing and things that we do. But if that's not something we want to pursue, then we certainly don't have to pursue it.
I think there are a couple of things I think it would add to the city. Number one is that's terrain that's difficult for people to get with equipment, and if we go in with a brush cutter, that type of thing, it's going to be pretty rough. It's not going to be a very natural look. And so if you have the goats go in there and clean up, it's going to be a much more natural look, and just the public service part of it, and kids can come down, see the goats, and enjoy watching them do that. I think is part of creating community in the city, as opposed to just having guys run over it with a brush hog or something. I think there's extra value to having the goats do the work.
And I think, we kind of had that conversation at the CPPS board and among staff too, that folks just kind of like when the goats are out and they go, and we saw more people comments on our Facebook posts about the goats when they were at Riverfront. People just kind of like seeing them out there. That's got some amount of value. I'll agree to that. And about the recurring cost piece of it, and talking with the contractor, this isn't couched as let's say we just did this area at the $7,500 price point. It's not that it would be a $7,500 price point each and every year. This kind of gets us down to where we've got the first grazing in the spring and then the second grazing in the fall after a controlled burn. And then moving forward, we're looking at maybe one grazing every other year in these areas after the fire department is gone and done those controlled burns as well. So those costs kind of ratchet down. I mean, it would be recurring in that we would still have them at we would need to have some level of, whether it's the goats or whether it's more equipment or people going out there and doing that. So that's, you're always going to have to address the growth, but I don't think the $7,500 price point for the initial application is something that we would desire. We probably wouldn't have pursued that from a staff perspective if that was what we were looking at. So
just for clarification, it's not just the initial, it's 2 grazing.
Correct, right.
And the other part is, I think there is environmental benefits with not mowing and using. There's going to be people that it would mean a lot to not use gas powered equipment on that type of thing, where you get more of a natural approach to controlling undergrowth.
And I think that too, in paring this down, one of the reasons we brought this to the council for a 2022 authority in 2021 as an unbudgeted item was because of that amount of space. The contractor would kind of need some, he would need to plan his year kind of around that. In paring it down in as much as we've done, we could certainly bring this item back at the beginning of the spring because it's not as much of the time commitment for the contractor to plan for 3 acres versus for 2 grazings from 3 acres versus 2 grazings on 8 acres. So I don't think we're on as much as a time constraint right now. So if it comes to the spring and we still think this is a viable option that we want to pursue, then it might be something that we come back for the council to get some further direction on.
Have we thought about buying our own goats?
It's been floated. I've not put serious thought to it. It has been raised. I'm not sure as to the level of sincerity on some of those suggestions. Yeah.
That would go over big.
Hey, Zach, have you gotten quotes from any lawn companies for these?
We've not reached out specifically to
I
lawn
wonder
companies about
if
this.
that would be maybe something else to look at too, to see what would the cost of that be?
And
I
that'd be
understand
about,
it's-
and we will need to be going out for that point, related to the cemetery mowing.
Right.
We tend to recommend sticking with our cemetery mowers for the period of 3 years that we have if there's no major issues. This year, when we come up for that item, we're going to be adding some right-of-way mowing and some, fixed costs for force mows and things like that. So we're changing the scope enough to where
Right.
we could potentially add some of these, 3 to 6 foot areas off of it to get prices for that.
Right. Well, it was my suggestion, I
Mhm.
think last year, I think others too, if, we don't want parts of the city where the grass is 4 feet high because our staff can't get to it,
Right.
contract that stuff out. So,
Mhm. And this was kind of using that direction on
right.
moving to contracted with the kind of the additional intangible benefits that
We may
Councilmember
see the
added.
goats aren't that expensive. I
Right.
don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So.
Right.
Instead of buying equipment, see what it would cost. So that could be another option.
I think if you're going to be working public personnel or city personnel down there, you're taking them off the streets where they need to be doing ditches and culverts and
Right.
things are probably a little bit more important than that mowing down there. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, because we're short staffed in public works anyway.
And this would be more of a parks function, but the same, philosophy stands in that when mowing's a priority, these areas aren't the priority. It's everywhere else in the.
We do have someone on staff though that is specifically to care for the parks and public spaces.
Correct.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're not pulling the public works.
I mean, they'll offer use if they've got time and.
We would run that.
Right.
Like the arm mower. Okay.
Well, and I was thinking, I don't want it to look nasty and, I know what it looks like when you put that thing up and you mow back the trees, along Riverview, and that looks bad. And I don't want that look as people are there at the park. I was just in my mind thinking that, I'm not saying hold it back, I was thinking that we're just talking about being able to just mow a width, whatever wide that width is. And it's probably not going to look great the first time. It might not look great the second time or the third time, but eventually that gets mowed down, repeatedly enough times. But then we have that contract person, whatever landscape company or mowing company come in and say, this is back far enough that we want you to, that be part of your scope of work, that you now mow that area repeatedly. It just seems like the goats are going to solve a problem for right now, and then it's going to happen again here in a short time, and we're still faced with the same thing. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is that we're looking for. If we're looking way down into the woods and getting rid of all the undergrowth and that type of thing, I get it. But if we're talking about giving a width back where people feel safe and it's, mowed grass, I think we can accomplish that with, ourselves, and we have that person that is dedicated staff member to work on the parks
So
and
that-
department.
So let me just note on trails just for this discussion. So most of our trails are either on easements that are provided by some of those companies, right? Or they're attached with the right of way, that being with the street. But most of it, as you know, is in right of ways or public property. Or, I mean, it's either easements or public property like the parks. So when we obtain those easements, and kind of part of the general design around a trail is a trail surface is 10 feet. And the safety zone or the general clear zone is 5 feet either side. So our easements are 20 feet in width. The intention there is if I go off the path or I have to walk off because, you know, maybe somebody's coming and I just feel like I want to walk off the side, maybe they got a dog or something like that. You want that 5 feet on either side to be fairly clear. Now, you may have a park bench here or there, but what we don't want is obstacles, things for people to run into or things. So that's kind of the standard should be a 20-foot clear zone, right? Now, sometimes that's hard to do because just the way things, where it lays out, or there's a telephone pole by it, or, I mean, you know, we sometimes you have to work around things, but that's the general standard, is to have a 20-foot clear zone that we should be able to maintain through a mower or through, you know, your basic type of cleanup. And again, I think part of this was also looking at, you know, just that broader, well, what does it look like outside of that? Is, you know, I mean, are there areas that just seem like, you know, sometimes you walk through an area and you go, I wish I could see better, right? I could see around the corner or whatever. So I think some of it was looking at that, and just, again, I mean, clearly, I mean, we can utilize staff, our own staff. We can go hire temporary staff to do this, right? Now, the problem time in the summertime, all the temporary staff are tied up in the recreations and things, you know, around those things. Or this was just looking as an alternative, and it may be a combination of all of the above, right? We may find that something like this might work in one area, but then after that, I think, as Councilman Stites was saying, you know, if we can clean it back and make sure we have that clear area, and we can maintain that, I mean, that's really our number one goal, is keep that 20 feet clear. You know, what do we need to do to get to there? And then some of these other areas may be, you know, may just be there's parkland, some of this area that could maybe be usable, or the soccer ball goes off into the trees and whatever, and we just want to kind of clean that up again, so a kid's not running in there to get the soccer ball, and maybe there's, you know,
Right
critters
now,
or,
I think the
or
brush is
something.
keeping the ball from landing in the creek.
Right, yes.
So,
So sometimes having more space, sometimes just about having clear space for broader safety and use
Sure.
and things, but.
And
Yeah.
I think that's where I was going, not
Yeah.
knowing what's our objective here? Are we looking to make it look like a park all the way through it, you know, all cleaned up, and, you know, we can sit in there with eat a picnic lunch? Or are we just trying to make it safe for everybody? It looks good. It's mowed grass, and that makes a big difference on what we're trying to accomplish.
I think where we're at, and Zach's been doing a great job with this, is, you know, let's pull this back. Let's kind of get our game plan together. Again, it may be a combination of these things. I mean, the goats have been very valuable. They've done some, you know, I mean, it's becoming the standard. I mean, I saw some other city where, you know, they're doing, you know, bunches and bunches of land because they are effective. I mean, they're a fairly low cost way to clear a piece of land. There's no doubt about that. Then the question is, and then what? What's step two? What's step three? And maybe we can clear that up and work with the CPPS board some more. And
I do appreciate looking into local businesses first, though.
Sure.
And so I think that's great that we're looking at Edwardsville businesses to support and bring in on these.
Right.
So I guess what I'm hearing from the group is to maybe focus on prioritize that 3 to 6 feet, that 20-foot landing to the city manager's comments before we kind of pursue this one strategy, you know, and get it locked down any kind of contracting. Like I said, it may end up being a combination of some of the different things that we've been talking about, but because we pared it down so much, I don't think that the scheduling aspect of it will be too much of a challenge versus when we were talking about, you know, 8 or 9 acres versus 3 acres.
What is the width of our mower? Not our riding mower, but our mower on our arm, or the old tractor? 5 foot.
Yeah,
So that gets us that 5 foot on each side. Okay.
Right, yeah,
And
the riders
The
got that
riders
too.
is 72 also. Okay. Or 60.
So we'll just kind of look at reprioritization of with the existing equipment and personnel and see if we can enact a, vegetation control kind of plan for 2022. See how far that gets us and then maybe come back for some different suggestions from staff.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is consider authorizing the use of special sales tax funds for the acquisition of Arctic compressor and fill station, including all associated equipment and installation. Chief
Mayor,
Whittam.
council, before you tonight, is an item that's proposed to be replaced in 2022. This actually goes back to 2018 when we started the FEMA grant for the air packs. We needed to replace the granted air compressor and fill station that's on the trailer that's out back of the station. Over the course of the 3 years prior to the grant, we started to see an increase in maintenance costs and wear and tear on an item that was out of date from an original grant. We were not funded under the FEMA regional grant for the air packs. We were shaved down from about $3.5 million to a little under $2 million. It took away some additional items with that. We've tried it unsuccessfully for an additional 2 years to replace that same item. Earlier this year, we had calculated in the 3 years prior, we had spent close to $15,000 on maintenance on an old grant item. This year, we had a catastrophic failure of the diesel generator pack that goes in there. The replacement value, the replacement cost was quoted to us at about $21,000. We went through the budget process and looking at 2022 to buy a new compressor system, but the price tag was not to exceed $56,000. We come across through the NPP GOB, which is a cooperative purchase agreement, the Arctic air compressor that you have in front of you for $44,290. At the 1st of January, there was a 5% increase in this generator set. Our original budget item just for the compressor and generator and fill station was $56,000. We're trying to beat the price increase for January 1 by purchasing it for $44,000 now. And we have an estimate not to exceed of $5,000 to wire the station. So we're still $6,000 below what we're proposing for 2022, still with the intent to try to come in further below the existing cost. We did compare with HGAC and a couple of other items, similar compressors that are more name brand, Bauer, Eagle Air, and they were quite more expensive than what we had anticipated here. We also felt if we were going to spend $20,000 just to replace the generator and have 2 other additional items that had to be replaced in another 3 years to do the entire process all at one time. That is why it's in front of you tonight. We are proposing that we allow the city manager to enter into the NPP Gov cooperative purchase price to purchase this Arctic air compressor and fill station. It will not be in a trailer. It will not be modified to be put into the trailer like the one that was granted to us. It will be a permanent fixed base station air compression system that will set in the firehouse. If the city decides to make a move and purchase a new public safety facility building, the compressor will be able to move along with the new facility as well. So this will be a purchase that will last between 15 and 18 years that we're looking at anticipating now. The only reason we had it in front of you is unsuccessful bids in the past with the FEMA grant funds, the catastrophic failure to it now that we need to look at replacing it. If we're going to spend $20,000 for a generator, we'll spend another $24,000 to replace the whole thing. It's not a 2003 manufactured item. I'll entertain any questions if any council member or mayor has.
This is a brand new item, not a rebuilt item.
This is a brand new Arctic air compressor. There are 2 that are used in Johnson County. One at the Johnson County Community College, the other at Shawnee, I think it's North Public Safety High School Academy class. It's actually available through Feld Fire through NPP Gov, which is the distributor that we bought our air packs through with the regional grant. It is everything that the city of Edwardsville needs at a cheaper price than the major other 2 air compressors that we looked at.
And you said the anticipated life would be like 15, 18 years?
15 to 18 years is what you usually get out of a compressor fill station. After 15 years, we have to have the 6,000 PSI bottles hydrostatically tested and in the blast chamber so somebody doesn't get hurt when the bottle's overpressurized. It will have annual maintenance costs to it. It will have annual inspection costs to it. It's like our normal breathing apparatus, but the expected life is at least 15 to 18 years. We have exceeded 18 on the trailer that is out back now that was granted from the Wyandotte County UG from a non-existent. We can't find the program to where it's been offered anymore since that one time.
Is there a warranty on the item?
Yes, it's 5 years as incorporated in the purchase price of $44,000.
Okay, great. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we authorize the city manager to purchase the Arctic Air for $44,290 and $5,000, not to exceed $5,000 for the installation.
Second?
It has been moved and second to authorize the city manager to purchase the Arctic air compressor and fill station for $44,290 plus a not to exceed 5,000 installation. Would the clerk please call roll?
Shriver,
Yes.
Stites.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
KR.
Yes.
Mawat.
Yes.
Next item is to hear staff presentation regarding 2021 quarterly budget review for quarter 3.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, this continues our regularly scheduled quarterly budget reviews that we've been doing for a number of years now. This will be the review of the third quarter for fiscal year 2021. We're going to start on the revenue side. As a reminder, we focus on what we kind of designated those major revenue items that tend to bring in over $100,000 per year. Starting with property tax, typically at this point of the year, we're at 99.8% of our what ends up being our total. Right now, we are at 98.9%. We are short 1 month of allocation, which I believe we are typically showing at this point. So October has the final allocation for property taxes. Once we get that in, I think we're going to be right on track where we should expect to be. Currently, we're at $2.4 million. And as a reminder, at our adopted budgets that we're referring to, we assume 97% collection rate, not the 100%, which is included in the state worksheet. So not a lot to report on property taxes. They continue to come in and at the levels that we were expecting. Sales taxes, as you can see, we are outperforming our average. That's that black line on the graph. Typically at this point of the year, we're at 74% of what our audited total is. Makes sense. We're about 75% of the way through the year. Right now, we are 89% of what our adopted budget would be. So we are outperforming that budget. If you remember, when we adopted the budget at the beginning, or excuse me, in August of last year, a lot of uncertainty on how sales taxes were going to perform. So we budgeted pretty conservatively. Now, not only have we exceeded those conservative estimates for 2021, we kind of exceeded all of our other past performances, at least in the last 5 years. So at least from a sales tax perspective, the economy seems to be, people are out there, at least they have been throughout the year, have been out there and buying. I will say, and breaking it down a little bit more into the granular level, our city sales taxes, we're within the trends of where we can expect, but we're on the high end of that. Our city use taxes, for a while, we were trending significantly higher than what we would expect and above the trend lines for city use taxes. Now we cautioned at budget adoption for fiscal year 2022 that we didn't want to just assume that was the good times are going to keep on rolling in all these revenue items. And that's bore out, at least in the city use taxes, because revenues for the third quarter, it's starting in September, really dropped pretty precipitously in that line item. Now it's still within the, our normal trend patterns that we would expect in a normal year. So it's not, below the mark of where we want to be, but it's a drop from kind of the historic highs that we were seeing in that area. So I think this showed some prudence in holding back on some of the revenue estimates for sales and use taxes. Wyandotte County sales taxes, those are outperforming the usual trends, and the Wyandotte County use taxes are significantly outperforming some of those trends. So really across the board on a sales tax perspective, we are in a pretty comfortable position that I don't have really any concerns of going into the last quarter of the year. Similarly, franchise taxes, we're on track to hit budget if revenues kind of follow those traditional trajectories that they typically do. We're usually at 73% of what our audited total is for this line item. We're a little bit ahead of that. It took about 2 years, a year and a half for us to get, once the Evergy and BPU, or the Evergy consolidation happened with KCP&L, once that that took about 2 years for us to really get a handle on what the normal trajectory is now that some of those new rates have been established. And we're pretty comfortable that we've got a handle on what to expect for that, which has bore out and some of us hitting the projections to this point of the year that we set at budget time last year. So again, no real issues or concerns with franchise revenue. I fully expect that we're going to hit and probably slightly exceed that budget line item where we originally thought we would be. Similarly, for gaming revenue, kind of a similar story to sales taxes. Didn't really know how it was going to pan out for gaming in 2021. We are below the average line that you'll see on the graph, but that's because the beginning part of the year was really depressed. Starting around that second quarter, we started to catch up. So we're really only slightly below that trend line. We're at 88% of where we thought we would be at the end of the year, which is significantly higher than the 74% of the total that we're typically at. So gaming revenue has seemed to have rebounded, and we're getting to those kind of normal levels to where next year, unless things kind of take another wacky turn, I think we're going to be operating in that space that we're comfortable at, and we've done a really good job in the past of kind of predicting where that's going to end up. Court fines, we're trending a little bit below where we typically are at this point of the year and a little below the trend line average. We had some just lower than average returns on court fines in August and September. Nothing overly concerning. If we don't hit this budget, I think it'll be at a pretty minor variability. So again, the way this is kind of an imprecise science as we kind of map out court fines. We use a kind of a rolling 5-year average to see where we're going to be, and that protects us when we have a high year when we've had in the past, and it kind of balances out when we have a low year. This isn't a low year. I think we're kind of on track to, we're maybe on the lower end of the average, but not, anywhere near historic lows. So court fines are performing pretty much as to be expected at this point. Ambulance fees were above our average collection at this point in the year, and we are about 4% farther along than where we typically are at this point of the year. Again, Deputy Chief Morrow has done a good job tightening up that billing aspect. We've been working, we being administration and EMS, in actually transitioning all of the EMS billing and revenue management from administration over to EMS. It'll probably just create a more efficient system where if someone has specific questions about their ambulance bill, they're not working through administration, which has really only been a money handling aspect of that. We don't really have a lot of insight into the actual billing and service portion of it. So transitioning over to EMS is going to create some efficiencies there. May not, have a tremendous impact on revenue collection, but decided to bring it up as we're talking about that. So no real concerns on ambulance fees. If anything, it's outperforming where we thought we were going to be, and every indication seems to be that we're going to hit budget on that as well. Motor vehicle taxes, they always, this is kind of based on different formulas that we get that are always kind of lowballed. So we just stick with those formulas because I'd rather them be lowballed in our estimates than us overestimate. This is kind of rinse and repeat for that kind of dynamic. Usually we're at 87% of collected revenue. Right now we're at 91% of our adopted budget. So performing stronger than what we thought we would be. We're kind of always performing stronger than what we thought would be on motor vehicle taxes because they tend to come in, the estimates come in from the sources that we have lower than what they are. So things are performing well in that area. As far as a broad picture, general fund revenue, usually at this point in the year, we're at 83.8% of where we end up being at the final audited figure for all of our revenue items. Currently, we're at 90.6% of our budgeted, where we budgeted our revenues to end up at the end of fiscal year 2021. So obviously with the sales taxes and gaming kind of bouncing back stronger and sooner and more consistently than what we originally assumed, that puts us in a pretty good position as far as where the fund balance is going to be for the general fund, and puts us, pretty considerably farther along than where we thought we would be at this point in the year when we adopted the budget in 2020. I'm adding this slide because when we adopt the budget for 2022, we revise some of those estimates, and we've got some additional data from these revenue line items. So again, normally we're at 83.8%. Right now, we're even outperforming the revised estimates where we bumped up some of those revenue figures when we adopted the budget just this past September last month. We bumped up some of those revenue figures because of the strong performances in some of those line items, but we were still tempering it with a little bit of caution, being conservative. We like to approach it being conservative because we like to present you a budget that overperforms on a revenue than underperforms on a revenue, and that seems to be what we're going to end up with at the end of fiscal year 2021. As far as general fund expenses, this is kind of an all encapsulating look at all of the general fund budget items. Typically at this point of the year, we're at 75.7% of what our audited expenditures are. Right now, we're at 76.7%, so we're trending about 1% higher than where the average is, but we're not outside of that range of how the average is calculated. So I don't really have a lot of concern that we're performing at that 1%, especially with some of the inflation and some of the costs for services that have gone up. If I were to isolate some of the items that may have pushed us, have nudged us up that 1%, workers' comp has come in slightly higher than what we had anticipated at the beginning or at the time of budget adoption. Things like fuel costs are a little bit more expensive than what I think we anticipated in August of 2020. And then there are things like the community center where, we often budget some projects in the community center that we never really end up getting to. This year, we got to one of them in some of the remodeling we did over in the kitchen area. So, we had balances in that we wanted to use for those kind of purposes. And so when we do that, that pushes us up on some of the expenditure levels. But again, a 1% level of variability 10 months into or 10 months after, actually probably more than almost a whole year after the budget was set, I think speaks to the level of responsibility and cost control that our departments have been showing through this year and what they have been showing in previous years. Any questions on the general fund before I move on to some of our other funds? I see none. So we'll go just a broad level view at our other funds. The debt service fund, we still have scheduled transfers to come from the special highway and our sewer fund that'll be initiated in this quarter, in Q4. We wait till this point of the year to schedule those because we might play around with some of those amounts in the, especially in the special highway fund, depending on some of the other projects we have going on. This will be the last year that we have a budgeted transfer from special highway to debt. Just as a reminder, fiscal year 2022, we're kind of reprioritizing that fund for actual street projects. So debt service is really, and this doesn't reflect the 1.4 million bond payments as well, as that happened after the quarter. So no real areas of surprise for the debt service fund. Special sales tax fund, as I kind of alluded to earlier, in the vegetation control item, and then our sales tax kind of broad overview, we're performing strong in this area. The large ticket items in this fund that have hit so far are some of the leases we've got for our fire department equipment, as well as the surface seal project from the Public Works Department for the southern neighborhoods to the tune of about $120,000 there. We may have a budget amendment in this item, as again, we're starting to look at some of these other street and parks projects that may kind of affect where we think we're going to end up as far as expenditures go. And that we might come back at the end of the year, before the end of the year, with a proposed budget amendment and special sales tax, but nothing that's you've not already been aware of in some of the approved projects related to streets and the parks to this point, and no real major surprises coming out of the revenue side. Special highway fund, so these revenues come from state highway fund and county highway fund. Our expenditures are at about 4,000 right now, and that's for some of the crack sealant work that we've done. We will have the $125,000 in scheduled debt transfer that will hit this fund in this quarter, as well as the surface seal striping and some of the work on 102nd Street. So that's the kind of activity that, as we play around with how much are we going to transfer out of some of these different funds, that's going to dictate how we structure some of our budget amendments that we bring to you at our December meeting. So you'll see definitely in the fourth quarter more expenditures hitting the special highway fund related to the debt payment, surface seal project, and the 102nd Street project.
This is one where we'll exceed our budget, but we have fund balance in that fund, so we know that's one that will we'll go above our budget, but we have revenues that have been there for prior year.
Yeah, we've sat on, I say we sat there, we typically carry a balance in that fund that, because we prioritize all these different street projects, we're gonna spend that down, which is gonna require a budget amendment, which we'll bring to you in the next couple of meetings. Really nothing of any specific note to bring up in the Economic Development Fund. The largest expense out of that $17,000 is the $12,000 membership to the Wyandotte County EDC. We don't really budget any revenue unless we have, origination fees or things like that, which we can anticipate. So any revenue coming into that Economic Development Fund is really just kind of a bonus. Solid Waste Fund, really on track with how we assumed this fund was going to go when we approved our Casey disposal contract at the end of last year. Right now, we're likely going to be bringing back some consideration for the council rate adjustment for 2022 to keep pace with the kind of contractually obligated increases that are built into our contract with Casey Disposal at that 1.5%. And also in working with Casey Disposal, we've done a good job of, and they've been of some assistance in identifying customers that may not have been, it's just onesie twosies of areas, of pockets of areas that were not in initial counts that was provided by Waste Management. And I mean, they were always getting billed, but they weren't in the calculation determining the per address cost from Casey Disposal. So they've done a really good job helping us firm up those counts. So we've got a more reliable number that's going to help inform how we structure some of the rate adjustments that we're going to be bringing to you. But other than that, no real items out of the solid waste fund for further discussion. Sewer fund continues to perform pretty healthily. At this point, where we may be, it may be the third year where we do not have any rate adjustment to the sewer fund, which is always good. We always budget more expense out of this fund to account for potential, catastrophic failures or repairs or anything like that that would affect the sewer system. Knock on wood, so far we've not had to dip into those reserves, but they're there if we need them. But revenues are coming in, at the same frequency as they would for any other utility fund at the rate that the bills are that they go out. So no real concerns out of the sewer fund at this point. So that's kind of a broad overview. I think we've done this a number of times. So if there's questions on any of these funds, let me know if you think of any later, or if anybody watching along think of anything, give me a call, shoot me an email, and we can get some more into the weeds.
Thank you, Zach. Mike, do you have anything to report other than what you've got already?
Well, I just one addition, maybe two. I don't know if we still have any cake around here today, but after the meeting, if you want some cake, somehow or another, I got another year older this past weekend, so somebody brought a cake today, and I'm trying to reduce my cake intake. So if you'd like a piece, please take one. I would like to congratulate those that ran for election that got elected. It's always a tough part of the process all the way around. I know that. So we'd like to thank Ms. Cahar for her mayoral-elect position. You have lots of work ahead of you. Mayor McTaggart was a very active mayor, so I'm sure you have lots of places to fill. Of course, Ms. Shriver for the city council, Bishop, who's with us this evening, and of course, Mr. Stites for his service to be on District 7 of the Unified Government Commission. So just want to say thank you to everybody. I will say it just goes with staff and everything. Election seasons are always kind of this time for us, and we've had great councils here. Expect that to continue, and we appreciate all of y'all's hard work and dedication to the city and the things that you do to make this community a better place. So other than that, I don't have anything further, Mayor, unless
Thank you, Mike.
any comments.
Zach, have you got anything to add?
I do have one item that I believe is mentioned in the written council report, but we did have the Spooky Express on Halloween Day. A lot of you guys were there. That was a really great event. Where, between the fire department and the police department and Parks and Rec, I just want to thank them for their staff involvement in putting all that together, as well as everybody who registered. Really just a good turnout, good weather. Got a lot of suggestions how to make improvements to it, which we're going to be exploring for next year. The next event is going to be December 11th. That's our Ho Ho Express. It's another neighborhood parade. We're going to do it later on in the evening. So give some of the ATV and UTV folks some opportunity to get a little more creative with some of their decorations and light it up. And what we're going to do is end that with the actual mayor's tree lighting ceremony and kind of holiday get together that evening, that Saturday night at the community center. So that way, all the fun that we've had during the parade, we kind of have a place to gather and mingle for that. So there'll be more details coming out related to that event, registration, routes, kind of the whole format of it will be coming out pretty soon. So that's really all I've got on that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Chuck, we're going to start with you.
Well, I guess first off, I'd like to say I appreciate the recognition for running for District 7, and I look forward to being the representative and the voice that I feel like it's been long overdue, and I appreciate that for District 7. Appreciate it. Couple things that we had brought up in the past was the PA system that we talked about. And if you want, I can do my list and then you address them all, but it's not that bad. The PA system, paperless, where we're at on that. 9711 Steel Road, an update on that. And the Junius Groves signage. So there you go.
I'll take the first two or the last two there. 9711. So the contract was awarded. They're doing the cutoffs for the utilities, I guess, with BPU. That one's been a little bit.
Can't hardly hear you.
I'm sorry. It's BPU's cutoff process has taken a little longer than I think the contractor thought for cutting the water line loose at, I guess they wanted at the street.
So there hadn't been any conversation with the owner or interacted?
There had been no conversation with the owner.
That's just, actually, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's disappointing. I was hoping that there would be something there that or that whoever represents it would have stepped up and.
Dale Brothers, who's the demolition contractor, is moving forward.
All right.
On the signs, and I believe maybe they're coming in.
Oh, nice.
So that is the kind of the mock-up, if you want to call it, or really the permanent, but we do have all those signs in. So if we want to schedule that event here, maybe the next meeting or so, then we're ready now. So we ordered sufficient number of signs.
Would you, I know we all can see it.
Yeah.
But would you step in front of that camera if you wouldn't mind? Just so any people that aren't standing in here, they can see it and they know what we're talking about. I like it. I think that's nice.
We've gotten the necessary clearances, I believe, from KDOT, because we are working in their right of way. It's their sign, we're responsible for them, but we always work with our partners. And I think you probably have an update on the packet and the sound system.
So kind of working backwards on the paperless item, I have had several conversations with different software groups, both ones that we currently have contract with our city website, and then some other third-party firms about that paperless option. Some of the costs coming in are to the tune of, actually all the costs coming in are to that tune of between $5,000 and $7,000 annually. What the major kind of changes to the processes and the firms that I've talked to and the firms that have been suggested to me by other communities really are more internal in the development of the agenda versus the external budget presentation of it. Now they do have some significant changes to that in that it's more digitized. In looking at it though, and I think I may have referenced this when I sent out the agenda late last week, I do think the concerns that I'm hearing from the council seem to be more of the paper reduction and then the ease of navigation to access the agenda materials and to be able to zoom and see certain, if there's maps or there's plats or some of those items that have a lot of detail. I do think that with the tablets that have been issued to the city council, that so the first thing, we made kind of a change in how the PDF is organized, and that it's broken down in the chapters if you were to access it on a mobile device or in your web browser, which, as far as an organization standpoint, it may be easier than shuffling through papers or trying to find and scan and find a specific page. So that changes up that format. And if you use I think that, and we could schedule some training and just look at different ways that we could do this. But with the tablets that have been issued, I think that we can accomplish some of the improvements that you've mentioned in some of your early comments about cutting down the paper and making it easily navigated, and being able to manipulate it and zoom in and get a little bit more finer detail on it. The monitors up here are really more for, because we have, when we do the live stream of it, it's so the council can see what the public can see and vice versa as far as the staff presentation view of it. So unless we made some pretty significant changes to some of the uses and the capabilities of these monitors, which I've not gotten into exploring the cost related to that, because that would be more essentially what these are essentially external monitors hooked up to kind of the control system laptop in the back. They're not their own monitor. So if that's a direction we wanted to go, I'll explore costs for that. But to your point about reducing paper and making it easier to navigate, I think we can accomplish that with some training on the tablets that we have now. I don't know if you have any other questions related to that. And we could schedule time to do that for anybody who might be interested. On the PA system, and these are, we fielded some questions and concerns about this as well. So just to give you a little insight into our PA process from, specifically my standpoint. So on city council meetings day, I started kind of a dummy meeting, essentially doing audio tests on all the mics, testing them to making sure they're registering and that they can be heard clearly on the recording. So that way I know that all the mics, they are connected to a mixer. Soundcraft Notepad 5 mixer, and all the microphones are connected to via that kind of control panel that's underneath the dais. So those are all connected via internal wiring into the wall, into the mixer, which connects into my computer. So all the recording of the comments, they come out clearly. And the check that I have for that is I use the recordings of the city council meetings to put together the minutes. So that way, whenever the meeting gets posted, usually the day after the city council meetings, I'm going to be the one hearing that this mic's not hitting, it's fuzzy here. That's kind of the internal check after the fact, in addition to the before the fact kind of mic check that I do on all the microphones. We kind of have those systems set up. Now, there will be instances, say on October 25th, that audio was a little bit rough. The reason being, and after the sound check that I do around 4:30, we had a 5-minute internet outage that I just wasn't aware of, that kind of did away with all the connections that I had in the back. Didn't realize it until I was doing the minutes. That's happened before. I've been able to catch it and kind of correct it in the moment. It's just not a perfect system. It doesn't happen that often. But really, I think from if somebody's watching this and doing the live streaming aspect of it, I think what might be affecting the audio quality more so than the internal hardware that we have in the room is likely insufficient or spotty internet on the end user side of things. So we know that we've got pockets in the community that have some, not the best internet connectivity. And this kind of speaks to, as we get some more opportunity in the area of the broadband infrastructure, this council's given the authority to put together that broadband task force that we've talked about a few months back, that we'll probably be exploring as some of these other, explore some of these other projects from this federal money that's coming in. That I think is more if they're watching it live, like say if somebody's watching it live and it may be kind of choppy and it may be kind of muffled, my assumption is because of, unless there's something that I'm just not catching, that a lot of those issues are on the end user experience due to slow or crowded internet. Now, if that is ever the case, and if someone wants to listen in on a conversation or discussion that we're recording and putting out there, what I encourage them to do is, we post the link out to the recording after the fact on our YouTube, or it's a YouTube video that's going to have all of the city council presentations that we provide you guys that you can see in your monitors, as well as the recorded audio that's connected directly to my computer. So if they're having trouble with the live stream, watching it as it happens, and they want to go back and actually hear it, the recordings that are posted after the fact are 95% of the time pretty clear and easy to follow. And if anybody has any questions on how to do that, or if they can't find the link, send them my way and I'll show them where to go. But that's kind of my assessment on that fact. Now, that said, I've reached out to the folks who did the installation for all the mics and all the kind of equipment that I've referenced to add, to see if it's the potential for adding an additional mic over on the staff table. What I want to do is make sure that having 3 mics within that kind of amount of space doesn't create, back feed, which really diminishes the audio quality even more. That's why, say, the city manager's mic is not as hot as this mic is, because if it were hotter, it would pick up over here and cause some back feed and some loops and some echoing effects. So, this room's not really the best as far as it was never really set up for some of the systems that we're doing. I think that we've done some of the solutions that we've done do a lot to improve the transparency, especially with the recordings after the fact. But I understand if there's frustration if someone's trying to watch live and it's not being, they can't hear them as well.
And what I had heard over the last 30 to 45 days is that it's quiet is what they're not that it's slow internet or they're not seeing it live. It's just that they're unable to hear it. Somebody you can hear it really well, and then somebody, and I'm not picking on Mike, but I am, but I couldn't hardly hear you just a second ago. I mean, we're just right here. So, and I understand how others are feeling and not being able to hear it. Some people, are clearer and easier to understand. And I don't know if it's the mic, the actual mic, not Mike the person, but I think it's more of people just being more vocal in the mic itself.
And
is
there
what
is a
I'm
learning
hearing.
curve to that speaking into the mic and being, trying to be as clear as possible. On this side of things, I do think if people are having issues with the city manager's comments specifically, it's probably because I might have the mic turned down too low, so it doesn't, create backfeed and create other problems in interacting with this mic.
And I
So
understand why
I can
you would
play
turn
around
his
with those
down.
levels and see what we can.
I think one of the things we are going to look at,
Well,
because
look
we've
at
talked
you.
about it, is the mics that we have, the type of mics that we have, right? So, and again, we got to do some, will they overlay, would a surface microphone work better than these type of mics? Since generally I'm doing more of the talking, to have one of the little microphone, clip microphone or something like that, and then use these for others. That we are looking at, are there other microphones that might function better for that? I've not normally been known to been told I'm quiet, so I don't think.
Well, I don't know about being
one
not
teacher in
talking a
school
lot
said
and
that.
being loud are two different
Yeah.
things. But I think, if we have people that are taking the time to watch our meetings live or going back to view them, that they can't make it, that, we ought to do all we can to make that experience,
And I'll
good
share,
for
I
them
think
where
I've done with
they can hear it.
some of the just the more recent recordings, just to kind of show you that
Got it.
end result, to
Yep.
show you what it, more often than not, what we try and make it sound like. But it's kind of an evolving thing, and we're always on the lookout for making it better, because we do want people to, if people can't hear it, then there's not really
Right.
any reason to be doing it.
I agree. And then the last thing that I'm going to say, it's kind of just an interesting little thing that I wrote down while we were talking here. that $7,500 for the goats and cleanup up there, if you break that down to $15 an hour, that's 500 hours. And at 40 hours a week, that's 12 weeks, which is equivalent to 3 months. And there's about, that's 3 months to have somebody out there working at that same amount. And there's 517 feet that we were talking about, or at least that's what's listed on the sheet there, which is about an hour per foot. So just something to chew on. That's all I got. Thank you.
Margaret?
I'd like to congratulate the candidates as well. Carolyn, Chuck, Mark, congratulations. You're welcome. For Casey disposal, do we get a cheaper rate, a reduced rate if there's more customers?
It's a per address charge.
Right.
So it's really, you get, the more addresses you have, the higher that amount.
And remind me, the mobile home park, they don't
Not
use,
included in our service.
Do we
no.
ask them?
We did reach out to them and I'd have to pull the exact data. I do believe that, I mean, that if you add more volume to that amount of volume, then you may have some, I'd have to look and see how we presented it last year, but
I
there
didn't think
probably
they
would
were
be
at-
some cost savings there. They
Right.
were not interested in pursuing that
Okay,
whenever
I
we
just
reached
wondered
out.
if we reached out again. And thank you, Zach, for putting together that third quarter budget. That is extremely useful. None of us have any surprises. The Ho-Ho Express rave reviews. Thank you, police, fire department, all of Spooky Express. I'm sorry, Spooky Express, because I'm going to mention the Ho-Ho Express. Is the police and fire department doing any kind of a drive, clothes, coats, blankets, food?
I'll go ahead and give them the, so at least from the aid and charity perspective, the fire department has done, they've headed that up in the past with the help of some of the other industrial park. And I know the police department has had some different programs as well. What we're doing this year is going to be partnering with a nonprofit person who's organized this kind of events in the past, that we're going to have a family aid kind of event at the community center the week after the 11th, so December 18th, that we're working with the school to identify families. Right now, we got about 40 kids identified among all that, among those families that we're going to be reaching out to and providing some aid opportunities for over the holidays for gifts and toiletries.
Reach out to the public for that?
Well, it's the process as far as reaching out to, we work with the school to help us identify. That kind of takes us out of that, picking and choosing.
Oh,
type thing.
absolutely. But I didn't know, I mean, is it going to be general stuff? And if you're doing something, that's great. If you need help from the community, I know you'll advertise it well.
Back to your follow-up, I know we were going part of this. If you remember back in July,
Right?
Thursday's Bar started the Christmas in July.
We were there, yes.
Yes. So Zach is trying to not let the cat out of the hat, and I'm not going to let the
Okay.
cat out of the hat neither. All I can say is on December the 11th, any child that shows up at the community center is going home with a Christmas gift. That was the
Enough said.
purpose of the Ho-Ho Express for this
Okay.
year with the change to it.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Oh, the biggest question, $1 million question. When is 110th Street scheduled to open?
Do you have any?
Good news only.
I don't know, Dusty, if you have.
What?
We're working with KDOT and the contractor. They're still hold up the concrete.
Thank you.
The contractor's very adamant about getting all the concrete done before we do the surface lift. because they don't want to damage the surface lift and have to repair that. So we're kind of working together still through the details. We're still hoping that the weather holds, they get done with the concrete, we get the surface lift on, we open it. But we don't know for sure. So then we're working on a way to put some temporary striping on the base lift of asphalt and open it that way. So we're really pushing hard for this month, I guess. I don't have a solid
That's
date.
something. Thank you. I don't know if maybe, well, I'll just leave it at that.
So part of the challenge, I mean, so it is a KDOT led
Right.
project. I'm not trying to put that,
Correct.
So so the first thing is we had the delay in the 2 utility companies
Right.
getting out there. They were supposed to be ahead of the contractor. We knew water was going to have to happen during construction. There's been some changes there, and so they've had to get parts, and like everybody else, the supply chain's behind.
Absolutely.
And so it's, I mean, technically you could drive on the road's drivable, but the contractor's responsible until the project's done. And so they're going, hey, we don't want to open it up until we're ready to go. And KDOT's trying to push them to do it. I mean, the project won't be probably officially done, which I think we knew anyway, until spring, right? So final seedings and final
Right.
striping and, those kind of things probably will not occur until springtime. What we're saying focus on is what can we do to get the road open, even if it's something such as only the inner lane, so we
Right.
got 2 lanes, so we get 1 lane north, 1 lane south, because they're worried about, with the pavement down, water can't get into the gutters, right? So if it sits out there and freezes and they're still the responsible party. So I will say KDOT's working very hard to try to move it to where we can get that final surface course. Once we have that, then there's probably not much that would limit its opening in some manner. But yes, we get that question because I think people see it and you drive up there and it's like,
Well,
oh,
like
there's
you-
pavement,
Right.
everything's there.
I hope
and-
nobody's driven it.
And they see it all and there's some trucks parked up there because they're doing, pouring some sidewalks or whatever.
Right.
They're like, well, that's sidewalks. I'm same way. I'm like, what do we got to do to get it open? But that's the challenge that we're going through. And Dustin's literally day to day in contact with the contractor and our inspector, the KDOT people. So he's staying right on top of it.
Okay, so to be announced.
As soon as we know, believe me, we will tell people.
Right.
KDOT's also very strict on like striping and things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's not the city saying, well, we're gonna wait till it, I get it.
Not at all.
Last thing, the signs are wonderful. Signs, yes. And when were we gonna do that? Were we gonna do some kind of a,
Well, I think that's what the council needs to.
gotcha. We'll
when
talk
you-
about that next time.
When you want to, when you want to invite the
Right.
representatives here,
Okay.
kind of present them. As far as putting them up, that can be done fairly quickly, but we didn't want to go put them up prior to some service. So that's something you all want to talk about,
Okay.
which date works best. Then, we have a meeting, on
2 more.
the 22nd, and then I
2
think
more.
that's right. And then we have
13th.
or the 13th, and yeah. I don't know if Mr. Stites is available on that evening. And then generally, we don't have a meeting in the second meeting in December, though. That'll be another action item.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Garrett?
I don't know how to follow all that. Mike, I noticed on the Public Works report, they said that the 4th Street which is really coming along well, but across from the post office and all that. I went and looked at that fire hydrant and all. It's pretty cool. I noticed that they said there won't be any asphalt or anything work done on that until the spring. What's going to be done for that over the winter time? Because it's so dusty and, are they going to put something on there to where it's not a mud street?
I'll let Dusty come up.
I mean, I just
mean, they-
noticed that on here and I thought it's really dusty. I was down there
I-
today and
I think they'll be making some temporary patch relative to the water line cuts, but I don't know what
Yeah,
the
those
rest of it.
cuts with the dust and then their BPU will run their tests. I think they take a week and a half or something to, they run their tests on their line, pressure test, and I think chlorine tests on that new line. And then they'll backfill that flush with concrete actually, that surface, and then that'll come back out then when they redo that.
but they will obviously, they'll clean that street up.
Yeah,
before
it'll be
winter sets
cleaned
in.
up and have that backfilled and then we'll just continue to chase the potholes like we have.
Okay,
unfortunately.
well, that's the answer that I wanted to
Yeah.
hear because it was going to be a out West Kansas
Yeah,
road there.
on the
for a while.
other two sections, on 98th and 9th, the contractor just told me Friday, I think it was, that they're hoping to get the curb and gutter in and get the asphalt done on those. So that would be good.
Yep. Okay, thank you for that.
I just, the
Mike-
asphalt on the other two, part of the reason why it's only, they're a mill and overlay. So they're putting the curbs in, patching that piece, and then they mill and overlay the whole surface. Whereas on 4th Street, because that's basically total removal of pavement and rebuilt. That's the challenge between those two.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that something was good for the winter time down there because it's pretty nasty right now. I mean, glad the work's being done, but it sure needs to be cleaned up. The other thing, I had talked to you a month or so ago about some kind of a informational kiosk at the cemetery. Had you ever, you remember I showed you that picture of that one. Did you ever look into any of that? When you go to the cemetery, I mean, the cemetery really looks pretty good. I've been up there several times and I have people up there too. So, but I think it'd be nice if there was something really nice where the gazebo thing is. If we had some kind of a map up there and, maybe, I don't, just the information that needs to be there. The wooden signs are falling down and I think that we need some of that money that the CPS is talking about, I think should go that direction also. So,
I agree, and the CPPS board has talked about different sign concepts that they'd like to move forward on. Related to that earlier comment, one item that has been brought up that I need to, just a project we need to pick back up again is, some kind of shadow box or informational kiosk that would go around the gazebo portion of it. An idea was floated that we might be able to see if some of the B-Tech students over at the high school might have some, might make this a project if that's something they wanted to do. But it's been brought up, it's just not been pursued, but it's certainly on their radar. And to clarify real quick, special sales tax funds can't be used for the cemetery. So the funds that we recommended earlier for the park, those can be used for park purposes.
Well,
but
that's
not
kind of
the
what I'm having. Yeah, that's what you're hired for, to keep that straight.
Yeah.
And the picture or the kiosk thing the information panel I'm referring to is the one that's at the Bonner Springs Cemetery. When you drive in there, that's just a gorgeous setup for when you drive in. There's room for you to park and go look and see where the plots and the maps and everything are. So, 102nd Street, I drove it in a kind of a relic old 70 Bronco yesterday, and it was really pretty cool to drive up that. And I did sneak down. I violated the law. I snuck down the roundabout, and it's really looking good. I'm pretty proud of that. And it's been a long time coming, I think. Congratulations on your new police officers. I think that that's just awesome that you keep that going as with the way things are in 2021. I think it's awesome that you do that. Chief Whittem on getting the new equipment for the firefighters. I think that's very important, and that shows an awful lot of dedication from you. So that's me tonight. So thank you.
Carolyn?
I also had a question about the Riverview Crossroads project. I did not drive through it, but I did drive up to it on both sides. And it looks like we have sidewalk going from 110th and Riverview eastbound, like by the church, not particularly going anywhere. But then we cut off the sidewalk of several hundred feet and didn't go all the way to Speaker. Is there a reason that we didn't continue the multipurpose trail, or is that still gonna be completed? To the multipurpose trail and the sidewalk to go down 110th Street to Speaker Road? I feel like that's where it's gonna be mostly used and picked up on, is where the neighbors are coming in up there.
Well, because the project limits, basically, we're taking it to the road limits where we end the curb. So before we taper. So that's why it ends at those two places, because that is where the road begins to taper and we move from a curb and guttered section to just an open ditch section. Obviously, in the future, as those roads expand or get, further developed, then those sidewalks or trails will go further. Now on the trail section, because really when we think about that 10-foot trail section, think about it being part of a kind of a bigger trail where sidewalks are generally more local use. So the trail section ends there at the roundabout. It comes up to the roundabout and then goes out. So it will not go, it's not intended to go to the east unless at some point we decide we want to have that trail section go over that way. But, kind of like we think about 98th Street, you're going to go south. There may be some points where you utilize, part of the Betts Creek Basin or something like that. So your trail doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the road itself. It's really, just like our trails are down here in the southern part, right? I mean, some of them run along the side of the road, but others run along, a water feature or through the park or something like that. So
Sure. I was just surprised to see that we put sidewalk in on Riverview, but didn't put it in the section either side to get to Speaker, because I feel like the plans were that 110th Street or the Riverview Crossroads project went to Speaker Road. And so I don't know. I just wanted to see if that was
that's
in
where
the
it's,
plan, or
because that's where the end of that. I mean, the project tapers down to Speaker Road, but not the full width.
Well, and I
so-
remembered us talking about widening to tie in at Riverview. I didn't remember us discussing any sidewalk up there. So
at Riverview.
yeah, on Riverview.
Yeah, I think we have the width to put sidewalk on both sides.
No, I'm not talking about both sides. I'm
Okay.
saying I didn't remember that as a council we discussed adding a sidewalk on Riverview at all, just widening the street. And right now there is a pretty good stretch of sidewalk on Riverview, so quite a bit spent there.
I don't recall, but yeah, that is where it's at. I mean, I think the intention or thought is that all of your kind of collectors and arterial roads will have sidewalks attached with it when we build it. That's kind of been the plan. If that's something different, we can certainly relook at that, but that's generally the design is your collector and arterial roads will have some type of pedestrian piece to it, sidewalks, trails, combinations.
102nd Street, I've driven that several times now where it's open, and it is so much better for the full depth repair. In fact, I tried driving down it today, but they were working on the north section, which was great to see. We had to turn around and go back the other way, but I was excited to see that picked back up, and I think the community as a whole is really grateful for that improvement coming. I noticed we have Outfield is having an anniversary coming up, I believe. Oh, it was last weekend. Okay, so congratulations to them for doing well, hopefully down at that location. Spooky Express, again, was a great event. Thank you to all the different departments and Zach for chipping in and making that great. My nephew said it was his best Halloween ever. So great reviews there. Welcome to our new police officers. I noticed in the notes that our new office member, Laura, has saved us several $1,000s. And so I was really excited to see that, and I was hoping we could thank her and recognize her for that. Sorry, I'm almost done. Officers. Oh, the Edwardsville Mobile Pantry is coming up again this Saturday. And so I also wanted to remind folks that the registration deadline for that is this Wednesday. So if you or, any families in need in the area. They don't have to be from Edwardsville. They just have to be able to get here Saturday morning. Please sign up by Wednesday, so we're sure to have enough groceries for everyone. Oh, and Veterans Day coming up Thursday. Thank you so much to the men and women who serve our country. Definitely want to recognize them tonight. So.
And on that note, the chamber is having a chamber event on the evening of the 10th.
Oh.
Kind of a salute to veterans. So that is at Thirsties. I always get them. I'm always afraid I'm gonna get them wrong, but at Thirsties there on K32. So yeah, I think that's from 4 to 6. So if you'd like to come by chamber event, they'll be hosting that.
Thank you.
It stinks to be last because everything's already been mentioned. I do appreciate Laura's her sleuthing to find $8,000 worth of savings. That's awesome. So what's the intention or the goal with the piles of soil and gravel and whatever else has been alongside Edwardsville Drive on occasion?
We cleaned the ditches on the other side and we still have some touch-up work to do. We're kind of in the midst of doing that and 10 other projects. It rained on us and so we kind of got pushed off of that. And so we backed off that. We'll have that cleaned up. It's supposed to rain again on Wednesday, I think, but soon, hopefully we'll clean those piles up. Some of that, like at the turnaround there, actually belongs to Atmos or
Right.
Mears for the potholing there. And I need to reach out to them and see where they're at on that project. That thing is drug on and on. Initially, they were locating it so we could clean the ditches and it just kept, I don't know what they're doing now even. So, but yeah, we'll be cleaning those up.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we will not be meeting the second or the fourth week in December. Is that correct?
That is typically correct. We'll bring a resolution to you because I think we added in our sometime back in our code of ordinances that since it's a scheduled meeting, you can either cancel or reschedule a regular meeting by resolution, I think 10 days prior. So we'll probably put that on the one of the next 2 meetings. It'll give us enough time. So that's how we do it. We haven't in the years I've been here had that second meeting, but we don't necessarily cancel just in case there's something we're just missing. But typically we don't. And so the plan would be we will not have that.
Congratulations to the winners of the election. Look forward to working with you. And it's an exciting time, but it's a nerve-wracking time. So I appreciate that. With our newly elected District 7 commissioner, I look forward to him really carrying a lot of messages from this part of the county to the east end of the county. And a couple of those is like the sci-fi. I know there've been some people with the city that have brought that, put it on the table, and it wasn't necessarily rejected, but it just never got paid attention. So that would be great. And it just reminds me that the interlocal agreement, when we were looking at the casino revenues tonight, the interlocal agreement we have with the 3 cities is the way things ought to be. It should be 3 cities working together towards the same end and sharing in the costs and sharing in the benefits of it, because we definitely share in the costs. Our citizens are paying the taxes to 7th and Ann, and we'd like to see a little bit more of it come out this direction. So I look forward to great results. I appreciate it. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
You think you don't like being last. I would really sincerely like to congratulate Carolyn and Chuck and Miss Margaret as well, and you, Mark, for your participation in our community. It's very essential. It's a very vital thing to me. It always has been, and I think I've served the community quite well. But anyway, but I could not have done everything by myself, and I owe a lot to the council and to Mike and Zach. So with that, we are adjourned.